While we're getting that set up, I'll just thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Of course, everyone's in the wings, so I'm going to get my exercise over the course of the presentation this afternoon, but that's just fine. So thank you again for joining us. I am personally grateful to each and every one of you for being here this afternoon, because you're communicating to Jada and to me that you're engaged and invested in helping us as partners in collecting data related to world language education programs in our state. Jada and I, in preparation for today's session, identified several goals, and I hope that these goals align with what brought you here today. If not, we are going to have opportunities throughout the presentation. Please feel free to raise any questions that emerge, but also at the end of our time together today, we'll create time for questions so that we're responsive to your needs and interests. The primary goals for our time together this afternoon. Is that better? Oh. Jada, your puppy is with us. I'm not seeing it on my laptop. Sorry about that. But cute nonetheless, right? Everybody's interested in the session this afternoon, including our furry friends. So I can just go ahead. The goals that we identified for the session this afternoon are to really communicate the importance of the world language data collection and the value of that data to us as a state agency, but hopefully through this discussion, you'll see that it can add value at the local school district level as well. We are actively using that data, and I'm going to share some findings with you this afternoon related to trends that we've observed in world language education program data over the course of the last 10 years. A really important goal for our conversation is to, as I said earlier, work with you as partners to improve the quality and fidelity of our world language education program data so that we can better support programs and the students within them. And we're going to have a couple of clear examples and some guidance to share with you related to the how of world language data reporting. As I said earlier, we're going to be happy to create space for any of the questions that you're bringing with you this afternoon. And through our discussion, it will be really helpful to us to be able to identify areas of need and areas for support with this data collection moving into the future. So please make your thinking and your feelings visible to us as we go through the session this afternoon. My slide advancer is no longer working. There we go. Thank you. So I'll just briefly introduce myself as well. We didn't do that at the beginning. I'm Pam Delphos, and I work at the Department of Public Instruction as our state's world language and global education consultant. And I'm here today with one colleague. Hi, Jada.
Jada, I am the development and I think it seems that education development by my teams to see what's a bit more realized data for them.
Thank you, Jada. And hopefully the degree to which we collaborate at the Department of Public Instruction is a great model for the collaboration we also hope will start to take place at the local school district level between your program leaders, the world language department chairs, the department, the director of instruction within the district, and those that are responsible for data collection and reporting. It's a really great collaboration. So as we get into the session this afternoon, it is really important that we pause for a moment with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that we're here today meeting on ceded Ho-Chunk territory. And One of the important reasons to lift this in the context of our discussion this afternoon around languages is that among the 12 Indigenous sovereign nations of Wisconsin, there are 6 Indigenous languages that are represented within their speaking communities. Those 6 Indigenous languages are Ho-Chunk, Ojibwe, Oneida, Menominee, Mohican, and Potawatomi. And for the first time in our history, even though these are the original languages to this territory, for the first time ever this year, we're collecting data on the teaching and learning of these 6 Indigenous languages. So those are no new language elements within this year's data collection system. I just wanted to pause to stress the significance of the teaching and learning of these languages. They are endangered languages. It's a critical time for the preservation and revitalization of these languages, especially given the recent global health pandemic. During COVID, these communities lost a significant percentage of their native speaking elders within their communities. During that same period of time, they were really innovative in capturing recordings and creating online resources to support the teaching and learning of these languages. And I recently had the tremendous privilege and honor to go to Wadukudading Language Immersion School, which is a great language program on the Makudare Reservation in Hayward, Wisconsin, and observe the work that they're doing with kindergarten through current 9th graders. They're adding a grade level each year. But it was so inspiring and powerful to witness the degree to which kids are learning academic content. They're following the standards in Ojibwe. And in those learning environments, they're also integrating their Indigenous cultural heritage and practices. So they're using science, they're using math out in the field as they're engaged in harvesting and planning for wild rice, etc. So it's really exciting and really important work, and we celebrate that we are now collecting that data so we can be partners with those communities to support their language preservation. Beyond the Indigenous language data collection that's new for this year, we've also added collection opportunities for the Hmong language. Wisconsin is one of 3 states in the nation with the most significant percentage of Hmong-speaking residents: Wisconsin, Minnesota, and California. Hmong is actually the 3rd most commonly spoken in the state of spoken language in the state of Wisconsin. But until this year, we didn't know where it was being taught and learned within our public schools. So thanks to the data collection team and their magic in making it happen. But we invite you to please communicate with those responsible in your regions for world language data reporting to encourage the inclusion of the 6 Indigenous languages and Hmong as well.
Those languages or additional options. So it's similar to all other core languages that we have in our course list. You will start seeing the different levels of Hmong plus Hmong conversation and culture, native speakers, emerging and young learners. So those are just additional courses added to the course list with your own roster code. That you can select in MT course.
Thank you, Jada. This is a really important move toward equity and representation. If these languages are reported to this degree for Spanish, French, German, Chinese, Italian, Arabic, Russian, we want to make sure that our Indigenous and Hmong languages also have the diversity of programming represented in their data. Oops.
So they go under resources. There should be a new option in the menu called courses. So this is basically just the course list that we have on the data element page, but all in my state. You'll have the same filters plus some additional filters that will be added. It will display all the courses, but if you add a filter, you will only display the ones that you're looking for. But here's an example of how the data is going to look like in 24-25 school year, where, for example, a Jubilee, we will have, in addition to the 5 different course codes, we'll have 4 additional options. That's for each of the languages that we just.
Thank you, Gina. This is what I love about our teamwork, and I'm like the what and why of world language data, and Gina's the where and how connection to that piece. Thank you. So how do we use this data? Why does it matter? Later in the presentation, I'm going to share with you the legal framework for world language education programming in the state and the statute related to that. But our data collection now does help us to identify the degree to which school communities are in compliance with that statutory framework. And it's not intended to be punitive that we're now aware where programming is not aligned with statute. It's actually the opposite. It's designed to help us build community with districts, to have conversations about how to work toward equity and access to world language programming for all kids, regardless of zip code in the state. We also use the data to help inform program development. If I'm observing a growth in multi-language programs, the data helps me to know where those programs are in existence and bring those teachers together for shared learning, professional development, resource design. It helps me to answer questions related to research. I often am receiving inquiries almost weekly, actually, from college campuses, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country, also from professional organizations that are trying to get a sense of not only what's happening in Wisconsin, but how that fits within the national landscape for world language teaching and learning. And without good data, we can't answer those questions in a responsive way. The data also helps us to get a sense of the degree to which students have that access to world language learning and can help us identify where we need to add additional support, our communication, or to innovate, quite frankly, to improve that access. We learned a lot through the global health pandemic about how to do learning online effectively. And it seems like since we returned, we were supposed to return to better, but that didn't always happen when we returned to in-person learning. And some of the things we're seeing in the data related to world language education is really prompting conversations nationally and within Wisconsin around innovation. If a student wants to learn Arabic and it's not offered in their district, how can we forge partnerships and provide opportunities for them to have access to learning their language of interest that might also be deeply connected with their personal identity through alternative means to in-person instruction. And there are lots of different ways to get at that. The data is also really important with regard to policy and budget development work. It's difficult for us to get support from the state legislature for any program enhancement and funding without real definitive numbers on what's the return on investment? What are the numbers? We don't have the numbers, we can't tell the story, we can't make the case. So we really benefit from a partnership to get the best numbers to craft the best story possible to support this work. Teacher recruitment and retention. What place does that have in world language enrollment data numbers? Significance. If I am learning French and I have a dream of becoming just like my French teacher one day, and I'm thinking about going to college to become a French language teacher, and I look and see very few French programs, and the ones I see declines and cancellations happening. That impacts my willingness not only to become a teacher of French, but I may pursue a completely different career from education. We have a teacher shortage now across the board, and world languages, that's even exacerbated. So the numbers that we have to show healthy, robust programs can really support teacher development in these languages, which relates to workforce development. And I think you've probably all read in the media, the employers are looking for bilingual intercultural staff and employees who have global competence in those skills. And they have clearly communicated a need for that, and they compensate those skills very well. When we look at research and data around earnings over the course of one's employment, throughout a lifetime, bilingual members of the workforce out earn their monolingual peers. So we want to try to be responsive to employers in the state, but also to provide opportunities to students within our programs. My apologies, my laptop is not being very responsive. Okay, so world language data, trends, and implications. I wanted to just share with you a summary of what we discovered in data from last school year. That was the last set of data that was certified. And then 5 years prior and 10 years before that. I recently conducted this data analysis and shared the findings of DPI leadership to kind of inform recommendations and next steps. There is a link on the slide to a full data summary, but some of the high-level findings that I just wanted to share with you today were most significantly, there are significant declines over that 10-year period in enrollment in high school world language education programs. And 10 years ago, that number was between 54%, if I'm remembering correctly. It was one of the highest participation rates in the nation, actually. Wisconsin was celebrating our success as a leader in world language enrollments 10 years ago, and prior to that as well. We're now down to 38% of high school students who are enrolled in the world language. And among that 38%, most of them are only sustaining their world language learning for 2 or fewer years, which doesn't lead to a meaningful level of proficiency. So there's a lot of space for growth and development, and a degree of urgency with that work. We are, however, celebrating a finding that students of color are participating at rates higher than their white peers in middle and high school. And there's a lot to unpack around that data, but it's also important for us to think about, as we celebrate participation by students of color, to think about what it means for their white peers and their preparation to be full participants in our linguistically diverse cultural communities in Wisconsin. We're seeing declines among students who are economically disadvantaged. And very significantly, we're seeing reduced access to learning languages other than Spanish. We're up to now, I believe 10 years ago, it was right around only 30% of districts had one language that they offered. Last year, 60% of districts, based on the data that was reported, right? 60% of the districts had Spanish only. Think about that for a minute. Think about what I shared about teacher retention and recruitment. Think about what that means for students who want to learn a language other than Spanish. Think about what that means for a student who already speaks Spanish at home. They don't have a world language choice. Those programs, for the most part, aren't designed for students who already come to school speaking the language. So the data really matters. The last bullet point, I want to do a little happy dance. We don't get those moments when we can really celebrate successes. But 10 years ago, we only had about 60% of our districts that were contributing world language data to our data collection system. Because of some of the enhancements that we've been making in recent years, last year, 90% of districts submitted this data. That matters. So I want to thank you for your role in participating in that. When we talk about language-related data, oftentimes two program areas get confusing or complicated, and part of the time that we're going to dedicate now for the rest of the session is going to be supporting you in the nuances and understanding the distinction and sometimes similarities, but the distinction between world language education programs and language instructional education programs. So just at the highest level, world language education programs are designed primarily for students to develop proficiency in languages other than English. They're guided by standards for world language education, and the language of instruction is the language being learned, right? So Spanish is being taught in Spanish, French is being taught in French. Language instructional education programs are designed for one primary purpose, and that's to support English learners in developing English language development. And through that, also supporting their academic achievement. Imagine going to school in Wisconsin and not speaking English. Learning English helps you learn more, everything else. In addition to that, some of those LIEPs use the student's home language to advance that content learning while they're learning English. So if students are busy with learning English and they're in math environments that are taught in English, if you provide them the opportunity to learn math in Spanish through a bilingual program, and learning of math isn't delayed while they're learning their English. So ESL and bilingual LIEPs, or language instructional education program models, are federally required for meeting the needs of English learners as they develop English language development, and sometimes include that home language, not to be confused with world language. Did I just make that easier or better? We're going to have some activities now that are going to help with clarifying that distinction. So here's the question to put into the room. Can English learners also be in a world language program? Absolutely. That program is not designed to help them learn English, right? They're electing to be in a world language program because they want to learn that language other than English. There's some examples on the slide to help illustrate that. I won't read them all to you, but let's take the last example. A French-speaking English learner is in an English as a second language LIEP. That's how they're learning their English language development. But they're also enrolled in a secondary level French AP class. So every English learner has to have an LIEP. And they may also have elected to be in a world language environment. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Another question. May a world language learner be in a bilingual program? This is a little tricky. Okay. So students who are not English learners, but who are enrolled in a bilingual LIEP are reported using world language education program data. So raise your hand if you're familiar with like the LIEP crosswalk in that document that lists the different program models. Not seeing hands go up. No, I'm seeing one. Okay. So in my earlier slide where I had world languages and LIP side by side, there are links there that will take you to the program types and options. And there's really good guidance in the description about what to do if a student is not an English learner, but in a bilingual LIP. So what am I talking about? Usually that's a two-way dual language immersion program. So it's a bilingual LIP. It's designed to help English learners develop their English language proficiency and learn academic content to succeed in school, including content in their home language. So I'm a Spanish speaking English learner, and I'm in a bilingual education program learning in Spanish and English, but it's two-way because they've invited in my English speaking peers. So when you hear two-way dual language programs, these two languages are being used for learning. But the two-way part is the English learners plus English language models who happen to be native English speakers. Does that make sense? So we're learning from each other as we're learning academic content in English. But as a world language learner, you don't report me using the programming that's designed for English learners. I'm a world language learner. Okay. Shall I read through these examples, or do you have any questions about any of these examples on the slide? Good. So some of the common world language codes, world language education program codes that are used for former English learners or simultaneous bilinguals are listed on this slide. What happens in a really strong two-way dual language immersion program, or even a one-way LIP for heritage speaking students, let's say I'm a Spanish speaking English learner in a one or a two-way bilingual LIEP. I start off in that program experience because I'm an English learner. But good dual language bilingual programs are shown to advance English language proficiency much, much faster than traditional ESL if they're done well. So what happens is I graduate from being an English learner. I become a former EL. And once that happens, our former data collection system, they went invisible because LIEPs are only used to report English learners. So once those kids who were rock stars succeeded, we weren't collecting data around them anymore. To be able to track like their academic achievement, their graduation rates, all of that information. So now we're collecting them within the world language education program side of the house. And that's what these models described on the slide are used for. We'll give you some practice with this in a minute. So here, it's time to practice. So I'd like you, if you'd be willing, please, be brave. Show me an L or a W. L for LIEP, W for World Language Program with your hands. For number 1, is the program providing English language development to English learners? Is that an L or a W? We need to see everybody take a risk, be courageous. What do you think? English language development to English learners. I'm seeing L's in most places around here, and that's correct. It's an LIEP, right? Why isn't it a world language program? They're English learners, but what's the goal of the program? Developing English. It's not a world language program. Part of what kind of confuses people, I think, is the term world language. We used to use the expression foreign language. So world language is the new foreign language. And the reason we do that is because there are 350 languages spoken in the United States of America among our students' homes, right? So it's not, yes, they're languages of the world, but they're also languages in the home. So to say foreign language doesn't work anymore. That might help with the distinction. Number two, is the program designed to support access to subject matter learning in languages other than English? So through the program, students are learning math, science, social studies, for example, in French, Chinese. Is that a world language L or excuse me, world language W or an LIPL? I'm really curious to see people's responses to this one. Be brave. This is a trick question. Why are you not in your head? So this is a trick question. Uh-huh. Exactly. I was hoping to see L's and W's in a variety. Becoming familiar with like the two tables that I referenced and that are on that slide for world language program models and LIEPs, you're going to observe that within both, there are some learning environments where academic content is taught in languages other than English. So the answer to that could be either, and it depends whether they're an English learner or not. Okay. Number three, is the student a non-EL or former EL? So I speak English at home or I've exited my EL status. Do I get my language learning environment reported as an LIEP or whether it's bing, 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 W, world language, right? Because I'm not an EL anymore, or I was never an EL. This last question is really important. Oh, no, it's the one from the next slide. Sorry, or a slide that comes later. I'm going to hold that magic question. Let's ask ourselves if the primary or sole goal of the program is to develop proficiency in a language other than English for second language learners. World language, yeah, world language, right? It's not about English language development, it's about learning a language other than English. Well done. Okay, here's the important state statute and administrative rule related to world language learning. If you're involved in actually submitting world language data, you may have encountered an error related to this. I'm seeing some winks and nods, and Lorraine caught me before the session started with a question related to this. So since the 1970s, we have had a state statute on the board that requires that schools provide access to regular instruction in the standards-based sequence of world language learning for students in grades 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we have now within our data collection system, as I referenced earlier, the means by which we become aware if the school district aren't submitting data for 7th grade or 8th grade. That's also true for grades 9 through 12, but where it tends to play a role is in that 7th and 8th grade space. Really important question. So the question is, do all 7th and 8th graders need to take a world language course? The answer to that question is no. The legal language says schools must offer. It doesn't require that students enroll. But if we see no numbers, or really low numbers, it's an indication that it's really not a formal offering within the curriculum. And then as a conversation to talk about how to provide equity and access to that, and especially within a school district. If you have a middle school where kids are only getting access to world language learning in grade 7 for 6 weeks, grade 8 for 6 weeks, and then going to a high school where another middle school that's offering world languages every other day, those kids are going into level 2 in high school and maybe getting academic credit for level 1 from their middle school experience. So there are equity issues there. And it's all about just really making the opportunity available to kids to engage in this learning that we know has value on the back end. It takes 5 to 7 years of world language learning to develop meaningful proficiency. So 2 years in high school doesn't get kids ready for that. And we're also trying to develop a climate that supports world language learning so kids continue it if they go on to post-secondary institutions. Our college and university world language programs are also experiencing declines in enrollments. And once we lose programs, we all know this, it's true in all things of life. Once you lose something, it's really hard to get it back. So there is a link on this slide. I invite you to check it out and maybe have a conversation locally with colleagues around what the current state is and what goals you might want to set and collaborate around moving forward. But that resource on the bottom that's linked there not only includes the statutory language, but also has recommendations for program development and implementation. Jada, do you want to talk about the elements related to world language data reporting?
I think this information, of course, you have to set up everything in your student information system. So the first step is just setting up your course listing or your course offering. So you have your course schedule in your student information system. Each year, you'll report to us what courses are you offering this year. We set that up, and then initially when we started collecting this data, the world language program was submitted under the Student Section Association. We got a lot of complaints, and that was really confusing for districts. There's a lot of work because in most school districts, the teams that are setting up the courses and the schedule are different from the teams who are actually working with the English language learners. So it's always hard for them to communicate back and forth, to figure out which students now they have to add that world language program records. So just this year, we started collecting the world language program on the section level or on the course level. So you send a course, and you tell us that course is offered with the world language program. And then you tell us as well, what is the language of instruction? And then you send the students. So if you want, you can also send that world language program on a student level. We're not restricting that. But if you don't, we kind of derive that from a section enrollment. So if we know that the student is enrolled in that section that already has a language program, we will decipher that data and reflect that in your report card and once so you don't have to worry about that. So these are the steps. So first you send your course offering sections, tell us the language of the section, and then who are the students involved in that section of course.
Thank you. This is a list of the world language education program types that are available for which you report, like the program in which that world language course is situated. And the link that was on that earlier slide will take you to detailed descriptions of each of these program types. Jada referenced reporting the language of instruction. You might think, duh, if it's a Spanish level 2 high school course, the language of instruction is Spanish. We would hope it's being taught in Spanish. That's the expectation now that 90% or more of world language instruction happens in the target language. But now that we have so many bilingual programs growing around the state, We also want to know which subject areas are being taught in languages other than English. So you might be submitting data on a biology class taught in Spanish or a math class taught in Chinese. The language of instruction data can really help us to identify those areas of development. English is the default for course selection or course data, so you don't have to worry about choosing English if it's not a language other than English. But we do encourage you strongly to please work within your district to report courses that are being taught in languages other than English.
Roster details. You'll have to select the school and the semester or the term type. When you hit search, you can get a list of all your courses offered at that school, that term. And if you collapse each of the courses, you'll see the primary language insertion, and that's the value that you report to us. If you know exactly the local course code, you can also just filter by that, and you'll only get that specific course. But if you just want to check all of your courses, then that's where you'll put it. And if you don't send us a language instruction, English is assumed as being only. And then on exports, this is feedback that we get from a lot of districts. So they report that data from their student information system. They want to verify that it actually made it to the states and the state of portal. But they don't want to go and check each course at a time. They want to report it has all that information. So you go to exports. You can filter the collection by roster. Or if you don't want to, you don't have to. But the export name is course offered. And on that, you will see column C, where we have a language discussion. This is building on the slide that went about the statute, where initially, again, it was at this, we started collecting it as a student level. But then when we got a lot of feedback from districts, what was confusing really is that districts are supposed to offer access to the word language, not that the students have to be involved in that language. So we kind of changed that to be, instead of student level, it will be on the section level. So we also changed the logic for some of our language L2, so rules, to also look at the section level, not as some level. And again, just based on feedback we got from school districts and just how their teams are set up in their school, it made sense to just have that set up on the sports level. And we still can do it on a student level if you want to, but it's on a student level. And then DPI will kind of get all the data. So if there's an English learner that happens to be enrolled or participated in a word language course, we'll get that data. We don't have to worry about that or filtering them out of our excluding them. Get all of that data and we'll take it.
Thank you, Gina.
All right, so validation messages. As you see, we have a few validation messages around our language. So we'll start at course now. So the first validation message on the far right, these are courses that are selected, but the course or the roster book that you're sending to us is just assigned to a very general word language, like word language other. It's not very specific. So we're giving you an error message as you choose a more specific course. So that's the first one. The second one is a warning. This is again back to that statute that you are not sending us word languages in those grade levels. So that's a warning that you can acknowledge, that all schools have all these grade levels. So if you're getting that warning, but you don't have grade levels, KG to 5th grade, you can acknowledge that warning. But this is just our attempt to check that we're actually offering the system. And then the rest of the validation messages are just looking at the data that you're submitting in combination of the student grade level or the world language program that you're sending on that course. So maybe you're sending an elementary world language program for students who are not in elementary grade levels. So that's something wrong with that data, so you have to pick a different world language program, or maybe you had the wrong grade level for the student assigned courses. So that's to just follow that out. You'll see that for other validation messages as well, where you just have just a combination of the world language plus the grade, and in some cases, the course that you're selecting are just not working together. So that's where you have to other student information system, make some changes, or in some cases, maybe it's valid, you can just.
This is another great example of where having that resource that lists all the world language program types with a description can be helpful when you're submitting the data or looking back at a warning or a negative message that you may have gotten to unpack why it might have happened.
And the links you see in the slides, if you click on each one, there's an elementary article, and we tried to put examples there. There's an explanation of how to fix it.
And the customer service team and I are always available to answer questions if you're unable to find an answer within the resources that have been shared.
Where you will see that world language program, again, we're asking all the school districts to send it on the section. You can still send it in both places if you want to, we're not restricting that. But if you go to my student portal and click on the student, so you go on the student details page, under roster, navigate to the course that is set up as a work with the world language program. And if you send it on the section, you'll see it there. If you send it on the student section, you'll see it listed there as well. In some student information systems, I know Skyward is one of them. If you set up a course on the section level, any student enrolled in that section that also automatically send that to student. That is okay. Others says maybe you'll have to manually, if you want it on student level, you have to do that manually. But if you only send it on the section, don't worry about the student section because we figured that out.
Thank you, Jada.
And then again, export to see that data, so you would like to navigate to each student at a time. Exports in roster, student section association, column W, column X. So if you send that word language on the section, there's a specific column that just called word language. If you send it on the student level or student section, it will be displayed on a different column. And that column is also used for other reporting as well. So because we use that program reference for CTE and dual enrollment, but you can also set word language on student level. So depending on where you send it, you might just want to check it into the comments.
So we're going to pause here and kind of do a check for understanding to see how well we were able to relay this, what sometimes feels complicated information. So question number 1, for whom is LIEP reporting required? For what group of students do you have to report a language instructional education program? English learners, right? Federally recognized, documented English learners must have an LIEP association. May an EL be reported as enrolled in a world language program? Absolutely. In fact, a significant number of world language learners are also English learners. When I taught Japanese at West High School in Madison for 10 years, in my early tenure there, I was an ESL teacher, and then I transitioned to teaching Japanese full time. A lot of my kids came with me and learned Japanese as they were developing English through an IEP. So they're really a wonderful population within our world language learning environments. May a native English speaker be reported as enrolled in an LIEP? No. No. They may be in a bilingual learning environment with English learner peers, but you report them in world languages. LIEPs are only for English learners with regard to data reporting. Okay, excellent. And here's that question I thought I was getting to earlier. If a student speaks a language other than English at home, should they be reported as enrolled in an LIEP? What's going on with this question? So I speak Spanish at home. Should I be reported as enrolled in an LIEP? Do we have enough information in that question to answer that question? No, what are we missing? Say that again.
How good.
How
We use their English.
are they identified through the language screener and the access test as an English learner? We oftentimes, unfortunately, for better or for worse in our culture, assume if you speak a language other than English, that you don't speak English. But we have a high percentage of students who are simultaneous bilinguals, who are proficient in two, sometimes more languages. So we have to be careful, and it's healthy to have conversations within our school communities to check our assumptions, to make sure that we're not defaulting to, oh, they speak Spanish, so they're in an LIEP. No, it depends. If they're an English learner, yes. If they're not, no. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I wanted to share in the resources some opportunities to learn more. You can see the links to both the World Language Education Program models and the LIEP details there within that list. There's also a list included in the list, some resources related to our state and our national efforts and strategic planning frameworks to improve world language education around the state and the goals around that development work. And then toward the end of the slide, you see reference to the Wisconsin Seal of Biliteracy and the National Seal of Biliteracy. We now in all 50 states as of this year have Seal of Biliteracy programs through which students can be assessed in English and one or more additional language. And if they hit the cut score, the criteria, they get a talent marker credential that is called the Seal of Biliteracy. Many of our districts in Wisconsin are participating in that, but we have a long way to go with getting full participation. So if that's an area of interest in your district, please reach out to us to learn more. We're going to pause now to invite any questions, any communication of needs or feelings related to this work, and also before we close, I wanted to introduce you to this QR code. If you take a picture scan with your camera, your phone camera, you'll be invited to evaluate this session, and the My Student Conference folks asked us to encourage you to please complete that. Ideally before you leave the conference, so they get feedback on how to make the conferences best as it can be for you into the future. So any questions for Jada, for myself? We still have time. Yes. Go for it, Jada. Eric, question.
7193, we get that, we have a charter school. So we ignored it because it's a charter school. However, they are receiving world language through one of our other neighborhood schools. They're in the same building. Charter school takes their core classes by themselves, and they take the non-core classes mixed with this other school, which gets reported under the other school. So I could never figure out how to get rid of my 7193, and it was a stain on a record, but because it's a charter school, I know that it said we could ignore it. Is there any way to get rid of that when it's taken through another school? Or do we just live with it?
Is that school within your school district?
Yes,
And it's a particular school or just a charter?
it's a, sorry,
Alternative is the.
it's just it's a body charter.
Yeah, I wouldn't, in that case, you can just ignore that error. If there's we get a lot of school attributes from a different team. Sometimes we can exclude specific schools if we know that attribute. But we don't get everything. So if there's a way that school is set up differently. Like we know like some schools are virtual. They're not required to copy the real time. So we can easily exclude that from the validation section. But in that specific case, we do not have an easy way to exclude them. So unfortunately, you just have to live with that validation section. You can add a tag to it, we'll just call it as confirm something, but there's no way for us. I don't know.
Even if they are being offered more language through the other school.
Yeah,
then
yeah, you can just ignore it.
I'm thinking out of the box as I'm listening to describe that challenge and what I'm this way. Create a course that doesn't exist to reflect the course they're teaching to the district, but then the numbers are being duplicated, which would have had the state company. So that's not a good solution, but sometimes these errors and warnings need to just kind of be seen as a badge of we're participating in the improved data collection for world language learning, and it does not count toward any rating of your school community. World language education is, not one of those areas that impacts your scoring. So thank you. I appreciate it. It's just so hard to live with, like, you got this wrong, but I didn't. Okay. Thank you. Other questions? I just want to, in closing, encourage you to consider ways within your local school communities and contexts to have conversations with families, students, school counselors, world language and English learner leaders, school principals, et cetera, around, what your data looks like at a local level. Right? And whether it's where you want to be or whether there are areas for growth and development, and reach out to us if we can partner with helping you to plan and facilitate those conversations in any way. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Be well.